And I'm going to start the recording. So all of these will be recorded, and I will send the recording to everybody who has signed up. And if you're new to Zoom, what you need to know about that is that when you get the recording, you need to...
One of the governors who's spoken out against having refugees. This is Alabama Governor Robert Bentley.
Somebody just got on who needs to mute. Maybe that's you, Patty.
Safe.
Yep.
And if there's any,
Very good, thank you. I was saying that if you're new to Zoom, when you get the recording, you have to download it. You can open it without downloading it, but you'll get 15 minutes and then it'll stop and then the recording will disappear. So if you download it either to your hard drive or to Dropbox, which is what I use, takes about 15 minutes to download and then it's yours, I think forever, I'm not sure. If anybody knows differently, let me know. And you can listen back to it over and over again, which people tell me that they often do. Other logistics are we'll meet every week at this time for 5 weeks. And that's about it. If you can do what people have done tonight and show up a bit early so that you can get settled. Sometimes people who are new to webinars don't realize that if you're walking around or running to the house with Zoom on your phone, we can all see you running and it's distracting. But of course, if you need to get up at some point, use the bathroom, it's not a problem. You just realize this is kind of like being in a classroom with a bunch of people, even though we're all in our own homes. Gosh, welcome everybody. It's so wonderful to see you all. This came purely as an inspiration where I thought, the holidays are coming and people get stressed out around the holidays. And for so many years, I've thought it would be wonderful to offer like a weekend seminar for people to do before Christmas or Hanukkah or whatever you celebrate. But it just always seemed a bit logistically daunting, mainly to offer an alternative for the suffering that so many people have around the holidays. And, now that online webinars are actually working and people are signing up and it's become a viable way to meet and learn together, this seemed like a good time to offer this and to really kind of invite in this time of year when we're entering the dark time and when many people feel overwhelmed by the holidays or whatever's going on in your life, to either get a refresher on the 3 principles and the single paradigm, or an introduction, depending on whether you are new or have some experience. So I'm very, very happy to be here. I started doing online training last year and found that it really worked, much to my surprise, and I'm enjoying it so much. You get to be with people from all over the country and sometimes all over the world. So maybe what we could do, because there's a lot of people, we won't do any kind of in-depth introduction. But it would be nice for everybody to just say, hi, I'm Susie and I'm from Las Vegas, or whatever your first name is and your town. And we'll just go around and then I'll get started. So would you like to start, Gina? Oh, you do have to unmute. So hopefully that's not too technically difficult. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Gina and I'm from Martha's Vineyard. Happy to be here.
We can just follow the images, if that might be the easiest thing. Rhonda, you could go next.
Well, I'll just go next.
Sorry, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I'm Marcia, and I'm from Camden, Maine.
Thank you.
And I'm Rhonda Nordstrom from Spruce Head Island, Maine.
Gary? Gary from Los Angeles, thank you.
Hi, I'm Wendy from Montclair, New Jersey.
You haven't figured it out.
Tim, did you just unmute or not? Or you anyway? Oh, now Tim's muted. I think that's Tim. I don't know where you're from though, Tim. You're muted now. There you go.
I'm Tim from Jamestown, Rhode Island.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Eric Platt from San Diego, California.
Yeah. Thank you. Got a few more.
I'm Eleanor Howard from Portsmouth, Rhode Island.
Welcome.
Good evening. This is Paula.
Go ahead.
I'm Jessica Summers. Can you see me?
Jessica, where?
Not that way.
Jessica, where are you from?
Sorry, my hand's in front of the camera accidentally. I am from Pennsylvania.
Oh, nice. Welcome. So you must know Dana and Devin.
Yes, I do.
Okay. Yep. Welcome.
Hi, Patty Siebold from Booth Bay, Maine.
Welcome. Anybody else?
Good evening. This would be Paula D. from Londonderry, New Hampshire.
Welcome, Paula D.
Thank you.
And this is Pike.
Hi, Pike.
Hi. My video seemed to have gone bad.
Yeah, and there's an echo on your, I think Pike is also from Rhode Island or from...
Yeah, I'm from North Kingstown, Rhode Island.
Okay, good. Thank you, Pike. And then it's just Joni.
Hi, I'm Joan Clapp Allen, and I'm from Brooksville, Maine.
And
My husband.
Eric
Yes.
from Brooksville, Maine. Very good. I think that's most everybody who's on. So I'm going to begin. And I'm Annika Hurwitz. I live in Rockland, Maine. I've been here for 2 years, mostly from Martha's Vineyard, but traveled around quite a bit. And I worked as a psychotherapist for 10 years, and I was leaving the field of psychotherapy because I felt like there was more to life than helping people cope with problems. And then I was introduced to the 3 principles that I'm going to talk about in this 5-week webinar. And that was in 1993. Over 20 years ago now. I'm starting to lose count. And when I was introduced to these principles, I thought I knew I had found the link between psychology and spirituality, which I had been looking for even back then for quite a long time, and had given up because I'd studied spiritual psychology, all different kinds of spiritual psychology. Now, can everybody still see? I think Pike might have hit something. You can't, Joni?
I can see you, but you're tiny in the bottom, just window.
Okay. Pike, I'm not sure what you did there, but we're all seeing your screen now. I don't know if that's something you can undo. Okay, thank you. Fantastic. Always a relief when we escape from the jaws of technological failure. Especially when there's this many people, it would be hard to start over. What I was saying is, when I was introduced to these principles, I knew I had found the link between psychology and spirituality. And I also knew from the presence of the presenters that they were living in a way that I wanted to learn to live. And I thought, I'm going to learn this for myself so that I can become less anxious and happier. but I'm not going back into the field of working with people. And then what happened was I got less anxious and happier. And when people saw that it was sustainable and not just the next sort of set of techniques coming down the road, people started wanting, to learn what I had learned. And so inevitably I began teaching this again. And this is what I have taught exclusively for over 20 years now. And it's always a wonderful pleasure. And I want to start by saying a little bit about principles and the nature of principles, because it's not a common thing to teach about principles, unless maybe you're a physicist. I don't know, because I've studied physics now on my own in the last 5 years to understand principles better. But I was never involved with math or science. It was that was always, not my thing. But in general, we don't walk around talking about principles or thinking about principles much. And to my surprise, in beginning to study principles, a whole world of really mystery, and I would say magic, opened up to me. Because principles are pre-existing laws of nature. They're not invented, they're discovered. And when they're discovered, they have an enormous impact on whatever field they apply to. They're always invisible, and they're always universal and consistent. And when they're discovered, they open up more and more discovery. And, the magic of them is that they explain so much. And yet before they're discovered, we have no idea that they exist. And we live in mystery, but we don't know it. So I'm going to talk a little bit about principles in general, these particular principles, and the new paradigm for psychological well-being that they give rise to. Because generally when principles are uncovered, they give rise to a truer paradigm than the ones that people have been walking around in, innocently believing to be true. And thought is extraordinarily powerful. Whatever we think, we experience as real, whether it's real or not. So when we had a flat earth paradigm, everyone walked around as if it were true, and it sure looked true. I mean, it looks like the earth is flat and you're walking around on it. And we thought about it in terms of if you were in a ship and you could get to the end of the earth, and then you would have to deal with the monsters. So the ships were equipped with monster fighting equipment. And, when it was discovered that the earth was round, it was not as if people jumped up and down and said, oh boy, I'm so glad somebody's finally found the truth. Whenever principles are discovered and they unmask a false paradigm and reveal a true paradigm, people generally have a hard time with it in the beginning. Because we don't, as human beings, we don't really like to have a fundamental way that we perceive reality to be upended. It's unsettling, and it takes a while to get used to. So historically, it's usually after principles are discovered, it usually takes about 40 years for enough of the generations who have been living in the false paradigm to kind of die out, and the obvious more efficacy and factuality of the new paradigm just takes hold. That's how it happens. I'm going to give a few examples just because it will help you when I introduce these principles to kind of prepare yourself for what you're learning here. The nature of this learning is you're being introduced to something that is abstract, but is impacting you every moment of your life. And it takes a while to kind of get the hang of it. And then as you do, you find that in the case of these principles, you start to have naturally more mental quiet. And the more mental quiet you experience, the more well-being you experience, which is the point, of course, of this 5-week webinar. So just to give a few examples, there used to be something that we called childbed fever. And that was women dying in childbirth at an alarming rate. I don't know, it was something like, 80% of women died in childbirth in the medical clinics. In the mid 1800s, a man named Semmelweis was running a clinic in Vienna, and he was really tearing his hair out trying to figure out what the source was of childbed fever. So germs had not been discovered. So when the fundamental principle is missing and has not been uncovered, people make up theories. And so there were all these theories that, it could be a woman's disposition that would cause her to die in childbirth. Or it could be vapors in the air. And so they, for a while, would not build a hospital downwind from another hospital because this vapors might be what was killing the mothers. It could be your religious belief. So they would bring in priests or different religious people to work with the mothers, and on and on and on, which is what happens, again, when the fundamental principles are missing. What happened with Semmelweis is that he went away on vacation, and while he was away, his assistant died of an infection. And when he returned, he did an autopsy on his assistant, and he'd been doing autopsies on the women who died in childbirth, and he could see that his assistant died of the same thing that the mothers were dying of, and he had the light bulb went off. There's somebody new who needs to mute.
Keep your eyes peeled. Surprises around every corner. You never know. You can't believe me.
Is that Amy? Can you mute?
Yeah, I'm trying. I have a different computer. Oh, there we are. Okay.
It says you're Rebecca. Okay, there we go. Now it's quiet. He didn't know what it was, but he said there's something on our instruments and on our hands that's causing the mothers to die. And he's told that the doctors in his clinic that they had to wash their hands and wash their instruments before they worked with the mothers giving birth. The doctors did not say, "Oh, thank you." They were affronted. How dare you tell us educated men that we have to wash our hands and wash our instruments? But they had to do it because Semmelweis was the director of the clinic, and their mortality rate dropped from somewhere around 80% to about 10%. So Semmelweis wrote up papers about this, and the pushback in Europe was so negative that he had a nervous breakdown. He died in an institution the same year that Louis Pasteur discovered germs under the microscope. And it took, again, about 40 years from Semmelweis's discovery for germs to start being accepted universally. And now here we are more than 100 years later, and we're still learning they call it germ theory, but technically it's the principle of germs because they're invisible, they're universal, they're consistent. And now that we have seen them, quote unquote, we can't not see them. It's so obvious, that if you, let's say, have a cold and you cough in someone's face, it's more likely that they'll get sick, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So once something invisible becomes visible, you sort of can't stop seeing it anymore. But initially, it's threatening and challenging to people, and they don't like to have their point of view upended like that. There's many other patterns in nature. There's many other discoveries like that kind of run that course. But, every once in a while, someone, just as these principles were discovered out of the blue in the 1970s, every once in a while somebody will discover something, a pattern in nature, like principles, like when fractals were discovered in the 1970s. And, suddenly the way these shapes work in nature became apparent to someone, and he began exploring it and explaining it. And we began to see that within many shapes in nature, which shapes nest within them. Like within clouds, there's the same shaped clouds nesting within them. Within pine trees, there's the same shape branches nesting within branches, nesting within branches. And this discovery of fractals has gone on to explain a whole lot about chaos theory and, basics about basic aspects of nature that we didn't understand before. So this is kind of an ongoing phenomenon, and whenever one of these discoveries are made, they give light to a whole lot. So in the world of psychology, in the 1890s, William James said, when the principles of psychology are discovered, it will be the biggest discovery of humankind, because right now what we have is like a house with many bricks, but no foundation. And the bricks are all the theories. The foundation of any field is its principles. And this was 125 years ago. And since then, the theories in psychology have multiplied and multiplied and multiplied, so that we now have over 450 theories, many of which contradict each other. But a set of principles were discovered in the 1970s by a very simple man named Sydney Banks. Sydney Banks was a very simple, uneducated man. He was a welder living in Canada. And this discovery popped to him out of the blue when he was having a conversation with a friend about how insecure he was. And Sid was saying to his friend, I'm insecure in my marriage, I'm insecure at work. And his friend said, "Oh, Sid, you're not insecure, you just think you are." And for some reason, it went into a state of realization where he saw that there are three principles that govern the human experience moment by moment as we go throughout our day. And I'm going to tell you what these principles are, and then the rest of the focus for tonight will be on the paradigm that they give rise to. Because when you describe principles, they're very abstract and they don't do a lot for you. But as you begin to experience them, they will teach you and teach you and teach you really for the rest of your life. But if you were to think about it, if someone were to say, well, what's gravity? What's the principle of gravity? And I were to say, it's a force field that governs how objects move through space, it really wouldn't do much for you. But if you got on a bike and you fell over, then you got on the bike again and you found your balance, now you would have a sense of gravity from the inside out. Because truly all principles live within us. And this is why when I teach these principles, many people will say that they've had an intuitive feeling about this their whole life, but nobody ever really spelled it out for them before. So as I spell out these principles, I want you to just kind of park them in the back of your awareness, if you're new to this, as a reference point. And then we'll talk a bit about the single paradigm, and then I'll take some questions. So the principles that Sydney Banks discovered are mind, consciousness, and thought. And you don't need to write any of this down because you'll be getting the recording, and you'll probably get more out of the webinar if you don't write. Of course, it's up to you, but if you just kind of sit back and try to listen more for the feeling of what I'm describing, in the same way that if you got on a bike, you would listen for the feeling of gravity. you'll get the most out of this. And then you can go back and listen to the recording and write down anything you want to write down. But as people who've been involved with this for a while know, the content is very small. The learning is very great. So you don't need to take a lot of notes. So Sid Banks used the term mind to refer to a formless energy that has a deeper intelligence. And, you know, in physics now, they are very interested in this because they've discovered that if you put two molecules to get in relation to each other and one of them moves, the other one will move even though there's no signal between them. And that experiment led to the realization that the action in the physical world is being governed by something that they're calling consciousness that has an intelligence in it. So it's really interesting how science and spirituality are meeting in many areas right now. So Sid used the term mind to refer to what you might think of as a larger mind or a formless energy that has a deeper intelligence. Thought is the brain activity, if you will, that starts when we're born and stops when we die. And it's the capacity to put shapes around the formless energy of mind. So you might think of thoughts as a cookie cutter and mind as endless dough. And consciousness brings thought, our thinking to life as if it were real. Consciousness gives you a sensory experience of your thinking moment by moment as you go throughout your day. So if I think, many of you have heard this example, if I think coffee ice cream and the coffee ice cream's in my mouth, my consciousness will bring me the smell of coffee ice cream, the taste of coffee ice cream, the texture of it. But if the coffee ice cream is still in my mouth and I think, oh, there's a child running across the street, he's in danger, even though the ice cream's in my mouth, now my consciousness is on that thought, and I will now be experiencing maybe some fear or some adrenaline or whatever my senses would bring me in response to wherever my thinking is. So this is just the beginning of starting to understand the inside-out nature of life, which is that we are always experiencing and feeling our thinking in the moment and not the external world, even though the external world exists. So for Sydney Banks, when he saw this, his life changed completely. He went from being a bitter, unhappy welder who had a sadistic boss to being a philosopher, or he called himself a theosopher. And all his friends thought he'd had a nervous breakdown, but he started being asked to lecture in universities, and he started writing books before he was practically illiterate. And he moved to the island of Salt Spring off the coast of Canada and started giving talks. And the mental health of the people on that island was so impacted that it drew the attention of some psychologists who came out to study this phenomenon that was going on in the 1970s, where people who were chronically unemployed were getting jobs, marriages that were falling apart were coming back together, and people who had serious psychological struggles were finding their well-being and getting off their medication and doing just fine. And so then these psychologists began to study with Sydney Banks, and then they started teaching. And for the longest time, we were a grassroots movement, and wherever we went, there would be a huge impact, and people would say, why doesn't everybody know about this? I can't tell you how many times I've been asked that question, and all of my colleagues will say the same thing. Interestingly, though, That was in the 1970s. And remember how I said it generally takes about 40 years for principles to take hold. So now we're a little bit past the 40-year mark, and all of a sudden, there's a global embracing of these principles. We've gone from having one conference to now we have 4, 2 in America, 1 in London, and there was 1 in Helsinki this year. And it's just growing exponentially because suddenly these principles are being, making sense to larger and larger populations and being sought after. So those of us who've been teaching for a long time are kind of scratching our heads because now there is so much interest and activity. So I want to talk now about the new paradigm that these principles have given rise to. And I'm giving you a lot in one night. And what we will do in the subsequent 4 webinars is go over what I'm teaching you tonight in many different ways. So if you're new to this, don't be concerned if you feel like you're not getting it all. Nobody does get it all in the beginning, because essentially when you teach principles or a new paradigm, you're really describing a hologram, something very large that takes a while to integrate. And you will integrate it through your own experience. You'll start to see in the course of this webinar that your experience of life is changing. And it changes from the inside out. Because what I'm doing in introducing this to you is I'm turning the light on inside your awareness about something that's been going on with you your whole life. Because that's what principles are. Again, they're not invented. They're not techniques. They're not coming from the outside in. There's something always working inside of everybody. And when you become aware of them, you navigate them better. You get out of their way more. So for many people, it comes as a surprise, and after a while, a very welcome surprise, to learn that just as we have an immune system that has an unbelievable intelligence in how it keeps our body functioning in a healthy way, way beyond anything we could come up with our personal minds, that we don't control or direct. Our mental health has what you might call an immune system, or a system designed by nature to keep us functioning in a healthy way. And when we align ourselves with these principles, they are able to do the work that nature designed them to do, which is to restore our mental functioning back to how it was when we all started out in life. And you look at children, and we talk about how resilient children are, how quickly they bounce back from setbacks, from upsets, how high their learning curve is, how creative they are, and this is simply because they're coming into life aligned with how nature made them. We came into life aligned with how nature made us. And then we start to perceive life through a false paradigm. And then that's when we start to get into trouble. So I'm going to review that paradigm now. And as I said, this may seem like a lot. Don't worry about it. Just take in as much as you can. I think everybody received this. I emailed it to either all of you or most of you. If you didn't receive this, please send me an email after the webinar and I will email it to you. So this is basically outlining the paradigm through which we perceive reality, which is a false paradigm, and how our mental life actually works. So if you think about it, the outside-in paradigm says that feelings are coming from something other than thought in the moment. So if you think about how we walk around in life, we'll say, I'm really bummed out because somebody hit my car, as if the car accident could put a feeling in you. or I have a lot of stress because family's coming for Thanksgiving, as if your family could put a feeling in you. Or I'm really happy because, I got that job, as if a job could put a feeling in you. I'm really happy because I won the lottery. We all know that statistically that apparently never works out. That's still surprising to me, but apparently, as if money could put a feeling in you, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And yet, if you think about it, for every time money, let's say, has made you happy, there's been another time when you've made money and it hasn't. For every time you've had a fight with a friend where you've gotten really upset, there have been other times when you've had a fight and you've been okay about it. For every time that a cloudy day has made you depressed, there's been a time when you've had a cloudy day and you felt cozy inside. So there's no logic to the idea that outside events and circumstances can put feelings in you. And if you have any doubt about this, there's a book by Marilyn Bowman called something to do with the inconsistency in in post-traumatic stress disorder studies. And if you're interested in this, I don't recommend you actually buy the book. I can send you the first few pages of the book, unless you're a psychotherapist and you want to see this book. It's a woman who knew nothing about these principles, who was fascinated by the fact that survivors of trauma had such widely different responses to traumatic events. She just could not understand how it could be that some people went through horrors, whether it's a concentration camp or, gang rape or whatever it might be, and came out just fine, had their trauma, recovered, and went on to have a great life. And other people might have a minor trauma and never recover. And she was fascinated by this. So she did 200 case studies. And if you read the first few pages of this book, it's evidence enough for most people that there's no link between an outside event and a person's inner experience or the feelings that they have. Now, the interesting thing is Marilyn Bowman knows nothing about our principles, so she said her conclusion was, we need to be looking more at the character of people than at the events, because there's some variable that has nothing to do with the event itself. Whereas in fact, what these principles have uncovered what the variable is, and that is your thinking in the moment. Because some people, for example, there was a boy in England who was being bullied every day on his way to school. He was being beat up, and nobody knew about it. Until another little boy followed behind him, and the other little boy got beat up. And then the second boy was down on the ground crying. And the first boy said, "What's the matter?" And the second boy said, "What do you mean, what's the matter?" And the first boy said, "Well, because the second boy said, I just got beat up." And the first boy said, "That boy has a lot of problems. There's nothing wrong with you." So every time he got beat up, for whatever reason, that's what he thought. So he wasn't he was not experiencing himself as being bullied. He was experiencing a boy he was encountering who had a lot of problems. Now, don't hear this wrong. This isn't to say that people don't get bullied, or that bullying is okay, that people don't have trauma, or that trauma is okay. It's not saying that events in life don't happen. It's proving a fact, which is that no matter what happens on the outside, there's only one thing that you can experience, and that's whatever thought is going through your brain. And as we go through this series, you'll start to see why that matters so much. If somebody else needs to mute there, we're hearing your phone conversation. If we get over to the middle paradigm, which is the mixed paradigm, this paradigm says events and circumstances cause your feelings. So, you won the lottery, that's why you're happy. But if let me use a different example. You broke up with your significant other, that's why you're unhappy. But if you got your thinking right about it, you'd be okay. This is what much of psychology is based on today. Cognitive behavioral therapy, which is reframing your thinking, positive psychology, is similarly. And the problem with the mixed paradigm is it's self-contradicting. Either your breakup is causing your feelings or your thinking is causing your feelings. You're thinking about the breakup, but they can't both be causing your feelings. On the level of logic, it's illogical to say that both events and circumstances are responsible for your being upset and your thinking is. It's one or the other. So given that we've already demonstrated that it can't be the events and circumstances, and we'll keep revisiting that. And I would recommend that as you go through this series, really the way that people take this on and have big impact is the degree of your interest in what you're learning here. So what most people do who really take an interest in this is that you begin to experiment in your own life and you check it out. And you'll notice, you'll start to notice that you're feeling whatever you're thinking in the moment, and that is a universal truth that is consistent and reliable and never varies. Mind, thought, and consciousness combine, and they make it look like what you're feeling is outside you. But the fact is, when they combine, what you're feeling is your thinking in the moment. So what these principles give rise to is what we call the inside-out paradigm, which demonstrates that there's only one thing that a human being can feel, and that is your thinking in the moment. And I'm going to say a little bit now about why this has such a positive impact on people and how that relates to your well-being. And then I'll take some questions, and then we're going to get more deeply into this next week. As human beings, we're creatures of instinct, and we can feel it when we have our feet solidly on the ground. So when it looks to us like our feelings are coming from outside us, as in a circumstance, and inside us, our thinking, people become instantly insecure because you're on shaky ground. You're trying to navigate life through an illogical paradigm, and your instincts know that. As soon as you get insecure, your mind starts manufacturing lots and lots of thought. And this is where people get into repetitive thinking, overanalyzing, revisiting different scenarios. And so what's happened is your brain is filling and filling and filling with more and more thinking. And you're feeling every one of those thoughts. So looking at life through an illogical paradigm causes extraneous thinking, which leads to stress, which leads to anxiety. And if that goes on long enough, that leads to depression, because depression is really just anxiety that's gone on for so long that you sort of collapse underneath the stress of it. So much now, in our culture is aimed at quieting the mind for good reason. So people meditate, they do yoga, they work out. Why? because when the mind quiets, we automatically feel better. We experience less stress, and the less stress we experience, the more well-being we experience. The problem is we're setting our minds up to manufacture all this thinking when we perceive life outside in or through a mixed paradigm. Then we settle it down through our meditation or our yoga or our walks, and this was me. And then I get back into life and fire it up and think through my insecure misperception of how it all worked, trying to sort it all out and manage my thoughts and manage my life. And then I'd get more and more stressed and eventually anxious, and then I'd meditate and calm myself down. When you begin to actually perceive life through a true paradigm, you feel more secure. And essentially what happens is there's a subtraction of thinking. Your brain, once you direct it towards, I'm feeling my thinking in the moment about that fight with a friend, your brain is going to start, you are hooking into these pre-existing principles, which nature has in place for your brain to work optimally. And your brain is going to drop thought for you. You actually can't drop thoughts. And I've talked with so many people over the years, and they'll all say, yeah, I sure can't do it. I try. Well, that's because it's not your job. It's the job of these principles to clear your thinking. As many of you know, and many of you don't know, we have somewhere in the realm of 100,000 to 250,000 thoughts a day. That's 8 thoughts a second if it's on the high side. Thought governs perception. It governs our entire experience of reality, and most of it's going on unconsciously. There's no way you could control your thinking. There's no way you could drop anywhere near enough thoughts to live in a state of well-being as a ongoing kind of go-to state of mind. But these principles, laws of nature are incredibly powerful. They can clear your thoughts, and they do. And what happens when there's a subtraction of thought is people find themselves landing squarely in the moment with a lot less on your mind. And when there's less on your mind, you become, once again, like we all were as children, naturally happier, more spontaneous, with more creativity at our disposal. In fact, there's research now which shows that when you're stressed, your IQ goes down. When your mind is calm and you have less stress, your IQ goes up. So it's not that you aren't aware of events and circumstances. It's that when you realize that what you're feeling about them is you're thinking in the moment, you harness the principles that are in place to clear out unnecessary thoughts and put you in the optimal position to respond to life. And this is why the CEOs that I work with, they have all come upon this intuitively, and that's why they're successful. And they'll say, I wait until I'm working out in the morning, and then when I feel a flow of fresh thoughts come to me, those are the ones I pay attention to. Or I wait until wherever it is that they allow, that they get what we call inside out, that they stop thinking about events and circumstances and they allow their mind to settle into the present. Their mind drops thought, aligns itself with these principles, and then because there isn't a lot going on in your brain, not only does your innate well-being spring to the surface, but you have room for fresh ideas and insights to arrive. So one of the things I want to say before I leave a little bit of time for questions, because always in the first webinar or the first class, there's too much to cover, is that our well-being is innate. And one of the reasons we've had so much success with this approach is that we know that no matter who comes to us, your well-being is as intact as the day you were born. And that it's kind of like a beach ball. it can get pushed under the surface of the water. But the minute you let it go, it springs to the surface. And we've seen this with every population, no matter how anxious someone gets, how depressed, how much medication, how many hospitalizations. Your well-being is as intact as the day you were born. And when you get thought off your mind, or a better way to say it is, when you align yourself with these principles and the principles takes thought off your mind, you feel calmer and more lighthearted, and you start to experience well-being. So that's the direction that we're going to be going. And I'll be, as I said, making, breaking it down and covering it, every aspect of this in more detail. And before I take questions, I just want to say for newcomers, there's 2 places that you can go to learn a bit more about this before next week, if you like. One is my website, awakepresents.com, which is on the emails that I send you. There's a video section to that. You can watch some of those videos, or you can go Google my name on YouTube and watch some of those videos, or you can go to 3principlesmovies.com, and there's a ton of videos there, but I particularly recommend, there's many, many good ones, but there's ones with prisoners who've caught on to this, and it's a dramatic demonstration of the universal efficacy of these principles, no matter what your life circumstances, no matter what you've been through, no matter what you're up against. That when you start to see that the mind only works one way, and you start to realize that life has no power over you whatsoever, that the only thing you'll ever feel is your own thinking in the moment, it will calm you down, because instinctively we all know that the quality of our thinking is always changing, and that if what we're getting right now is crummy thinking, that's going to change, and we're going to have better thinking. And when we do, we can lean in and take on whatever challenge arises. When that's all you're ever up against, life gets simpler, it gets easier, it gets much less challenging. And it's the reason why people like Viktor Frankl, not just survived the concentration camps, but came out intact and writing books. He realized the same thing that I'm teaching you all today. So I would like to leave some time for some questions, and do feel free to email me afterwards with questions. And I will probably be sending you some emails during the week with some more references. Yes, so is there anyone who would like to ask a question now? That's amazing. Here I was thinking, boy, I've been talking too long. I'll give it another minute.
Yeah, hi Annika. I have a question. So when therapists talk about processing your emotions, how do you approach that with the 3P approach?
Yeah, so we don't, that really doesn't come into play. Because, again, if you think about how we're designed, think about how children function. You have feelings and you have them and they pass. So you have a thought and then you have a feeling, you feel that thought, and then the thought leaves and the feeling leaves. So really, there's no place really in this, once you become aligned with how it works. I guess you could say the principles are processing them for you or through you in a very natural way. So there really isn't a job for you there, any more than, let's say you had a 3-year-old and he fell down and, or he had a big fight with his best friend. He had yelled about it, had a good cry about it, and then he was done. You wouldn't go to him and say, okay, now I want you to process your feelings. So, if you get outside in and you start thinking, oh, the fight's causing my feelings, and you start analyzing them and you start backing up your system, the feelings get backed up in you. But the minute your mind gets aligned with these principles and it's, it starts to clear out the garbage, if there's anything like that, the thought will come back and you'll have the feelings and it'll be done. So the system that's put in place by nature is much better at running the show than we are. Yeah. Thank you for that. It's a great question. Any other questions?
I don't have a question, Annika, but I just, actually, it's nice to see some faces here that I've seen before. And I want to just thank you. I never get tired of hearing the stories. So, and it hits home a little deeper each time. So thank you.
Oh, you're welcome, Rhonda. And that's true for any of you who are hearing this for the first time or the second time, and you're still thinking, I don't know what she's talking about. Just hang in, because it makes more and more sense the more you hear it. Yeah. I'm just going to give a little time for anyone else. Yes.
Okay, so here's the thing. I've had the experience, and so have some of my clients, that I can say if something powerful is happening emotionally, that it's just my thought in the moment. And then I can say, yeah, well, I'm still having the thought and I'm still having the feeling. So now what?
Good.
So
it's a great question. Now, here's the thing, Eleanor. This might sound like a small distinction, but it's a big distinction. What you're doing with this single paradigm is you're looking to realize insightfully that there's a system in place that is beyond us. It's bringing you the thought and bringing you the feeling. Now, when you realize that, your mind will calm itself down. If you find yourself thinking, oh, it's just my thinking, that's just your personal mind thinking about your personal mind.
Mm-hmm.
And I would never say it's just my thinking, really, because thought is it's an illusion, but it's a very powerful illusion that causes enormous amounts of suffering. So I would never say it's just my thinking. I know it sounds like a small distinction. You're looking to realize insightfully that you're feeling, you're thinking in the moment about that situation. And when you realize it, you'll feel your mind start to settle. And then if you can recognize that shift in consciousness and ride it, your brain will reorganize itself and you'll start to get fresh thoughts about it. And if that doesn't happen, then you need a coach or someone to help you really see it, because there's some way that you're still caught in the illusion, or you're trying to use your personal mind to just think about, oh, it's just my thinking. This is really about connecting with a system that's larger than us. And when you connect with it, you feel a shift inside and your brain starts to clean it up.
And it feels a little bit like a leap of faith. I mean, that's where I am with it right now.
Yes.
It's a shift, and it has to do with faith, and I get it, but I don't get it. So
yeah, there you go. And it's experience builds a little bit of trust. More experience builds a little more trust, and eventually you have faith. So I will say to people, take it on faith while you experiment with it until you experience it as a reality. But that little window there where you just notice a subtle shift to calm, learning to just ride that wave and not start thinking again is really key for people.
Yeah, I see that. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Anybody else? Got another minute or two here. All right.
That was a really good question, because it that's what it's been like for me is, I mean, I don't like to use the word faith because of the associations, but it really is seeing that I'm just a small part of a bigger system.
Yes.
It's such a different way of looking at it. Yeah, that's all I wanted to say.
No, that's such a good point, Eric. I mean, we live in a therapy culture. So this really is like a retraining to look in a different direction than you're used to looking. And that does take, it is a leap of faith until it simply makes sense to you because you're doing so much better psychologically. You know, David Bohm, great physicist, said, thought creates experience and then says it didn't do it. And that's the conundrum that we're all caught up in. We think combines with consciousness, and we're watching a movie that looks like it's outside us of our experience, but in fact, it looks like our mind's a camera photographing something going on outside us, where in actual fact, our mind is a movie projector projecting that image to the outside. And that's the kind of the unlearning that we all go through in learning this is, no, looks outside, it's inside. I'm feeling my thinking in the moment. Now, don't mishear that to think you're supposed to figure out what you're thinking. That will take, again, that's your personal mind stepping in to try to make it work. You don't need to do that. There's no profit in figuring out what you're thinking. You're just looking to realize insightfully, like if you are on a bike and you were wobbling, oh, I got to realize the feeling of gravity. I've got to realize that feeling of balance. When you're wobbly in life, when you feel insecure, anxious, etc., you want to look to realize insightfully, wait a minute, I'm feeling my thinking right now about X, Y, or Z. And notice if you come back into alignment with these invisible principles that are always at work. Well, good. It's just a little bit past 8 Eastern time, and I want to thank you all so much. And as I said, I will send you this recording. Download it to Dropbox or your hard drive, which it'll download for about 15 minutes. Then you could listen back to it, and I'd recommend you do at least once before next week if you have time. Feel free to email me, and I will send you probably some more recommendations. There's lots of material that you can go to. Anything by Sydney Banks, I recommend his books or DVDs. So I hope you all have a wonderful, wonderful week. I feel like you're a great, great group, and thank you all so much for coming. And we'll see you next week. Bye.
And thank you.
You're welcome.
It has been quite the pleasure to sit here with a cup of tea.
Oh, you're so welcome.
Yeah,
thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Annika.
You're welcome.